Several people have recently asked me about Unity presets. What are they? What can they do? And how they can integrate them into their editors, projects, and toolsets. Well, in this video, I plan to answer all of those questions, and then I'll pop in how I use them within my libraries within Unity. So let's dive straight in. So what is this underutilized feature of Unity that we call presets? And how do we use it? Well, I use presets to enable default settings for new components I drop into my scenes, and for import settings that are for assets that I bring into my project. And they can be saved into a project and set in a preset manager for using project-wide. And don't worry, I will show you how all these things fit together. So let's start with a small, simple example. And we're going to use this amazing asset from the asset store called HQ Retro Farmhouse. And I'll leave a link in the description to the asset store where you can find it if you fancy grabbing it for yourself. And if you're making a horror game, this is going to be a pretty good asset to have in your arsenal. So first, let's look at this asset. We've got this chair right here. And let's say I'm going to interact with it in my world during my game. Well, I'll probably want to have a sound on this asset for creaking. Maybe I sit in it and it makes a particular creak, or maybe I can push it across a floor and you can have that screech sound that freaks everybody out when they're playing horror games. Well, what we would do is we would have an audio source associated with this object. Now, as you can see from the default audio source settings, it's got play on awake, and the spatial blend is set to 2D. Now, I'm not going to have that set that way if this is in a 3D game, in a VR game, or any of those sort of things. I'd want my spatial blend to be right up there, and I certainly don't want it to play on awake. This audio source, as its default setup, is more for playing music, ambience, that sort of thing, or menus, and that general idea. So I want to set up a preset that has it built for a more 3D world that I can use. So let's start by looking at the settings, and I'm going to change a few things here, but your mileage may vary depending on what sort of game you're creating. So I'm doing this just to show you how the preset system works. Don't take this as the default gold option for how to set up audio in your games, because they all differ depending on the game and the ambience and the mixer settings you've got set up. So let's have a play. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off play on awake, because obviously I don't want all the chairs to immediately creak as you start the game, because everybody will just quit because it'll be super annoying. So I turn off play on awake, and I'm going to want it spatially blending. I'm going to want this to be a 3D thing. I want to know where that sound's coming from, because it might come from behind you if we're doing a horror game. Another thing we're going to do here is we're going to have a little bit of a play in our 3D sound. I'm going to set the max distance to 50, and my spread, I'm going to have it spread, and we'll have it spread a little bit, and we'll have some fall off this spread. And if you don't know what the spread does, it basically means that it's not just going to be a 3D sound at an exact location in the world. You'll get some sort of ambience around it of the same sort of creak. It's not exactly a reverb, but it gives a sort of nice atmospheric sound to it. So those are the settings I'm going to have here for this particular sound. Now, obviously, with this, I don't want to be placing this on every single item. I don't want to have to go and choose another one like the sofa here and say, okay, now I'm going to add an audio source and I'm going to change all those settings because I'm going to forget one of those settings that I want to set. Now, I could have this as a prefab, but then you look at it and you're like, do you want to put that as a prefab? It's not really going to work because you have tons of prefabs of just that audio, and that prefab gets chucked under another prefab for this sofa, etc., and the lamps and all the rest. What would work better is to have this preset set up. So let me show you it. Under this little title bar here for audio source, you'll see this little button. And this little button is actually the preset button. And if I press it, you'll see it pops up here. Now, obviously, this is a blank project with just this actual asset being brought into here. It doesn't have any presets set. So what we can do is we can press this Save Current To. And this will actually create a preset for us. And I have my content folder here, and this content folder can be opened, and I can leave this as an audio source.preset. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder under content, and obviously content is my own folder name, and presets, and in here I'm just going to call this spatial audio source. and I'll save. Cool. Now that's done. If I look in my project, I can see there's this little sort of bar icon here with the spatial audio source setting for the audio source set up. Now the next thing to do is to see how we would apply this. So let's look at the sofa. We'll take the sofa object here. We'll just pop it in our hierarchy and make sure we've actually got the sofa object. There we go, sofa A. And what we can do now is we can add an audio source, and you'll see that this has got the play on awake. It's got all the various bits set to default, but I can go back to this preset button. The preset pop-up will come up and I can select my spatial audio preset. And that, as you can see, has set my spatial blend up. It's done all the spread and it's put my max distance down. And that was a lot easier than having a sub object, another transform and everything, another game object under my sofa that would just be for my audio, or having a prefab in some variety that comes in. This is so much easier to set up and utilize. But you might be thinking at this point, well, I can do this with the prefab. As I say, you can have a prefab as just an audio source on a game object that you apply to all of these things, but you're adding a transform onto there and it's kind of messy. But one good thing about prefabs is if you then change all the options, they'll change down the line. But that's also a negative in this case. I might not want all my objects to change when they go down, and you can unpack the prefab, etc., but that doesn't exactly make sense. As I stated at the start, these presets enable us to set up a default for a particular component. And we can set up multiples of these presets across. We can have a spatial one that's very loud, a spatial one that's quiet, a spatial one that has a lot more pitch to it. We could set up a load of these presets and select the ones we're actually interested in. Now, one of the other benefits of the preset system is the preset manager. And you can find this preset manager if you go to edit and you go to your project settings, and I'll just drag and put this tab up into here. And you can see this is usually where you'll come in to get your player settings and set your company and all the rest. But here we actually have the preset manager. And what I can do is I can add a default preset here. And I can choose, and obviously I've got the audio selected here, but you can do it for importer, component, scriptable object, etc. But I could do a search and I can pick audio source for the thing that we're doing. And here you can see we don't have any presets set yet on our audio source. So we can pop into our project, we can take our spatial audio source, and we can drop it there. Now, I'm going to leave the filter blank, and I'll explain what the filter is in a second, but this is basically going to mean that every time we drop an audio source onto a component now, onto a game object, this is going to be used. So let's see how that works. If I pick my rocking chair right here, and I decide to use audio source again, suddenly spatial blend is up, we're at 50 max distance, and our spread is all set up. And I didn't have to go to my preset option to select it. It just done it as default. And that's what the preset manager gives you. But let's talk about that filter option. Okay, so I come onto this lamp here and I add an audio source, and it gives me all the details from my default that I've already set up in my preset. But for this lamp, I want the spatial to be a bit down because maybe it cracks and it doesn't when it smashes or something like that, and it doesn't need to be. And maybe the max distance, you can hear it, is a bit further off. And maybe we have a little bit larger spread on there. Okay, so let's save this as a new preset. So I'll come into the same way. I'll save current to content presets, and I'll put into here lamp spatial. There we go. And I'll save that off. And as you can see here, we've got a new preset set up. I'll come onto my project settings. I'll add a new one. I'll put in lamp spatial. But let's use the filter here. So what I'll do is I'll type in lamp into my filter. Now, if I come back into my scene and I select a different lamp, if I add an audio source, suddenly we can see we've got the spatial blend off of our lamp spatial audio source, and we've got all the rest of the details that come with it. Because what it's doing is it's looking at this name here, a floor lamp, and saying that contains lamp. We're good to put that on. And I'll just prove that that's how that works by selecting this fireplace tools. And now if I add an audio source, it sets the default one the one at the very top, this normal spatial audio source. So you could see if you had a wood, you could set trees and bushes as presets for your different audio sources, and then just be placing them all around, and you won't have to play with each one in turn from a standard default. And that's how the filter system works on the preset manager. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't go through how asset importing presets work as well, because you can use this on components, but you can also use it when you import assets. So I'm just going to give you a very basic example, and you can work off this to whatever you want to use it for. Let's say I had a folder called textures, and under this folder I add another folder called iconography. And this is all the icons for my company and my game that I'm going to bring into this folder to set everything up. Now, what I'll do is just off screen, I will place an icon in here. So let's just copy and paste an icon. So you'll see it pop up here. So here's a logo that I've brought in. And I don't want my logo to be compressed. I don't want any of my logos to be compressed. And also, while we're looking at it, I want my alpha to be transparent, and I want to apply that. There we go. Nice clean logo setup. So what I can do is I can actually create a preset, and I'll save this again to my presets folder. And this one I'm going to call logo texture importer. And we see it pop up there. Now I can add a default preset, and this will be a texture importer. And I can use my logo texture importer there. And I can specify that I just want to use this for logos. So now if off screen I just bring in a different logo, let's say I wanted a white version of my logo, then in it comes, and now you can see that it's automatically gone and set the compression to none and set the alpha as transparent. So you can imagine if you've got 3D models or you're using sprites or anything like that, you can set this up to automatically set the texture type to a sprite or set the sprite shape. You could do all this sort of stuff with presets. So this becomes very powerful to set up originally in your project, and then as soon as you start bringing stuff in, it all comes in. And even if you had a group of artists, you can imagine setting up all these presets beforehand. So when artists bring stuff in, they don't have to worry about, oh, have I set this thing correctly? Have I done this correct? Have I missed something? It automatically does it for them. So hopefully at this point you see a lot of benefit to using the preset system. But wait, there's more. I know people don't watch this channel for the basics, and you can do, and you can get a lot of benefit out of it. But I know a lot of you want to take this to an advanced level, a tools level. So let me look at a scenario with you. You have several libraries of code, components, etc. that you bring into every project that add some functionality Unity doesn't quite provide you. And with those components, you want to have presets set up for them. Now, what do? Every time you load those libraries, do you come into the preset manager, add a new default preset, populate it with those presets that you have in your libraries? No, you don't. You're a developer. You want to be lazy and streamline that system as much as humanly possible. So let's set that up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a menu option that enables us to automatically add some presets that we have in a folder to the preset manager. And I'll give you some tips and hints on how to advance that to an even higher level while I'm developing it. So let's start out. We've got our editor folder here, and we're going to create a new C# script, and we're going to call this C# script setup presets. And we'll open that in Visual Studio. And once it boots up, there we go. Now it's not a mono behavior, and we can get rid of all this, and we can start from scratch. Now we're going to create a menu item, and as you know, menu items come from the editor library. And we'll create a folder called My Menu that will appear on the top bar, and we're just going to call this setup library. Library presets. There we are. And this is going to be a static void setup library presets menu option. There we go. Done. Right. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to find all of the presets that we have within our libraries. So we'll look for all the GUIDs in our asset database. and we'll use find assets, and we'll filter for the type presets. And if you are wondering how to do this find assets, I actually have a video in the tutorials playlist on my channel that actually has how to use find assets. So I won't go into it in too much detail here. If you're really interested in find assets, which is an awesome tool, go and check that out. So we're going to be looking for type preset, not presets. And we're only going to be interested in presets within our library folder. Assets, libraries. There we go. Okay, so this will give us a load of GUIDs back, or not if we haven't got any presets set up, but we'll set up one in a moment. So we'll go string GUID in GUIDs, and within this, we're going to want to get the path from the GUID. And again, you can do this with the asset database class. And we'll use GUID to asset path, and we'll use, if it allows me to, GUID. There we go. Okay, now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to load the preset at that location. So let's use preset, which is actually in the Unity editor presets namespace. And we'll just call this preset. And again, we're going to use the asset database. And we're not going to use that. We don't want to autofill that. We're going to load the asset at path. And this is going to be a preset. And we're going to use path. There we go. Now, what we're going to want to do is actually add this to the preset manager. Now, I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But to do that, we need to know a type, because we don't just want to override all of the presets that are already set in the preset manager. We want to add this preset to the presets we already have. So we're going to need to know the type. And there's actually a class called preset type, which we'll use type here. And what we can do is we can use some functionality called get preset type from the preset, and that will tell us what our type is. And that enables us to do comparisons, etc., and get what we need. Now we're going to want to get a list, not an audio listener. I don't know why that came up. There we go. Which of course is in the generic collections. And we're going to want to get all the default presets, because that's the class that actually gets set up in our preset manager. So we'll just call this list. And it's going to be a new list of default preset. Now, under the class preset, there is actually some functionality called get default presets for type. And this will get us all the presets that we currently have for that particular type. And I'm going to use audio source. So we know we've already got presets set up there, and I'm going to add one to that. So you'll actually see these lists being created and adding to. Now, we're going to want to add to that list a new default preset, and we'll skip filter, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but we're going to put preset in here. And now we're going to use the same sort of functionalities to get, but we're going to use the set, and we're going to use for type, and we're just going to cast that list back to an array, and that's it. That will enable us to find all the presets we have set up in our library, get the path, and then load the preset from the asset database. Then we're going to get the type. We're going to get all of the defaults for that type from our preset manager, which is all this here. And then we're going to add to that list, and then we're going to set it as a brand new list with that in. And I'm going to come back to this in a second and talk about how you would expand this into a much more detailed, much better menu item or even automatic setup for your libraries. But that goes into a much deeper and a longer video that I can create later on if everybody wants it. But this will give you the basis that you can create off. And I'll talk about how to really do that special in a moment. So let's save that and jump back into Unity. So here we are. And we'll let that load, and my menu comes up and we've got the option there. But let's actually set up that folder. So we're going to set up the libraries. If you remember, that's what we were looking for. And in the libraries, let's say we had something like a game flow library. And under that game flow library, it had content. And under that content folder, had presets. There we go. So it's looking under libraries. If we remember from our actual thing here, this is what this assets libraries is actually doing for us. Okay, so under this, what we're going to do is we're just going to duplicate our spatial audio, and we're going to call this one, instead we're going to call it pitchy audio. Something we probably would never actually do, but let's just ramp the pitch right up so we know this is the pitchy audio preset. Now what I can do is use my menu option, and as you can see at the moment I've only got 2 presets set up, and when I press set up local library presets, boom, we've added pitchy audio source. So you can imagine if I had like 10 libraries or loads of presets set up in my libraries that I pass from project to project to project, I can have a very simple setup functionality that enables me to set up all of the presets in one go. But to end this video, let's talk about how we could expand this functionality for our libraries. Now, in our preset script here, we basically just add the presets that we've set up in our libraries onto the end. And that's perfectly fine. If you do this once when you start up your project, you're all good to go. But what I would do is I would expand this even further. Here, for instance, I would do a comparison to say, does this preset already exist in the preset manager? Has it already been set up? If it has, don't add it, because we don't want to just keep adding things on. That way I could keep running this menu with no fear that I'm just putting more and more of the same preset into the preset manager. The other thing you could do is create a scriptable object that had a strut of filter and preset. So that way you could actually then look for that scriptable object. Let's say it was called a preset scriptable object. It would look for all of those in your find assets, and then it would do the comparison, but it would also compare on the filter. And then when it created default presets for new ones, it would add the filter option in there. And that way you could populate this without worrying about expanding this too far with the same actual presets. And also you could put in your filters. But obviously there's a lot more code to that, and that's a much bigger video. If people want to see that video and they're really interested in me expanding this, then leave a comment down below and like the video, obviously, to let me know that I should build that. And I'll be happy to build that later on. But I know the attention span of most people, and we're getting to about the end of this video's length. And that's it. That's everything I was going to cover in this video. We now know how presets work, we know how the preset manager works, and we know how we can add some functionality into tools to add presets as we add libraries to our project or do something else with them. Now, if you found this tutorial useful, it's time to perform the YouTube shuffle of hitting the like button and also subscribing if you haven't already. And if you're getting a good benefit out of these, maybe they are helping you sell assets on the asset store. Yep, I see you out there copying this code, then consider supporting the channel with the Ko-Fi page that you'll find in the description. And as always, thanks for watching.